All right, everyone. Oh, please settle down. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our event, United Nations Peacekeeping, a practical guide, hosted by the IRGA program and Social Science Division. Now, I'm Pinda Viriyapunsi, and I'm delighted to be your Master of Ceremony for today. And here I am, joined by Professor Robin Ramcharan and Mr. Stuart Groves. And today, Professor Robin will be moderating our conversation today. So, established under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter, the Security Council is equipped with the ability to take enforcement measures to maintain and restore international peace and security. As such, peacekeepers are at the front line with regards to consistently involving themselves in peacekeeping activities, such as security sector reform, strengthening the rule of law, protection and promotion of human rights, and promotion of socio-economic recovery and development, just to name a few. Now, this panel seeks to delve further into the history and the works of the Blue Helmets and how they contribute to international peace and security. In particular, we will also delve into our guest speakers' experience and insights in relation to peacekeeping as well. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our distinguished speaker today, Mr. Stuart Groves. He is an international security specialist focusing on operational level issues, primarily from the perspective of the United Nations and other governmental institutions. As a 34-year career Canadian Army officer with extensive operational experience, he has served in many Canadian and overseas locations. In a variety of positions with the Canadian Army, his service has mostly been with the Special Service Force, which was Canada's UN standby force, as well as being tasked with domestic and international responses. He is a veteran of operations, and among a myriad of international missions, Mr. Groves has served in the Congo in 1963, Vietnam in 1976, Cyprus in 1964, 1974, and 1984, Lebanon in 1981, Iran and Iraq War in 1988, Namibia in 1988, the First Gulf War in 1990, Bosnia, Croatia, and Serbia in the 1990s, and Rwanda in 1993. While serving in Rwanda in 1993, he was seconded to the United Nations, specifically to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, or OHCHR. This led to a position with the OHCHR as a senior security manager, lasting from 1996 until 2009. And during that time, Mr. Groves operated in practically all areas of the globe, primarily to ensure the safety of staff and the assets of OHCHR, their offices, as well as specific activities. OHCHR often launched investigations into gross violations of human rights, such as large-scale massacres in Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi, and Afghanistan, in which he played a key role. He was appointed to several international commissions of inquiry: the attack on UNHQ in Iraq in 2003, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in 2014. In 2000, he was appointed to be a committee under President Marty Ahtisaari to conduct a global review of UN staff and facilities aimed at improving security. Since 2009, he has been consulting on these same issues for UN agency funds and programs such as World Food Programme, High Commissioner for Refugees, International Labour Organization, UN Women, UN AIDS, and the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, Caribbean Bank, and African Development Bank. Now, working with the Swiss government, he assisted in the formation of the International Code of Conduct Association dealing with private military and security companies. This work has taken him to a wide variety of countries and different challenges. Now, he's a graduate of University of Toronto, having acquired BA in Business Administration, Concordia University, having acquired MBA in Organizational Management, Leicester City, having acquired an MA in Security Management, And apart from that, he's also a graduate of the Canadian Army Staff College, the Canadian Forces College, the US Marine Corps Staff College, and the Royal Norwegian Staff College. He speaks English, French, German, and Norwegian. Now for today, following the panel session, there will be a Q&A session where you, the audience, can also pose questions as well. So now I'll pass it on to Professor Robin.
Thank you very much, Pinda, for that excellent introduction and exhaustive summary of Mr. Groves' career and achievements. I should call him Colonel Groves, one step away from General. Just when he joined the United Nations '93, you would have gone on to be General in the Armed Forces of Canada, but you chose the glory of the UN. All right. So we are very grateful to you for being here, taking the time to come and share your knowledge and wisdom about all of this. You know, we teach international relations, we teach the UN, we teach peacekeeping, we teach peace building, all of this nice stuff from textbooks. Yesterday we had the Ambassador of Finland. By the way, I wanted to mention the Ambassador of Finland. Not yesterday, when was it? 2 days ago, is it? Yeah. Thank you. And who was, you mentioned Martti Ahtisaari. Martti Ahtisaari happened to be a former president of Finland who won the Nobel Peace Prize for peace. For many things, including, I think you have on here, the mission in Namibia, is it? I forget, 1980s something.
I forget too, after that long list of I already feel old.
It's there.
Now I feel like 100 years old. So.
It's behind you.
Oh, my God.
Anyway, it was Mr. Ahtisaari who led that operation in Namibia. And so he served with him as well. So I want this to be not only informative, a practical guide. People there at the top of the UN, they make decisions, they take resolutions. But then how are things actually done, right? How do you coordinate? How do you put together a peacekeeping force or a peace-building operation? What does that mean? What are the logistics like, and so on? Who contributes what, etc., etc. And I want to give you a sense of those practicalities. I know in this world, academics, we don't have the knowledge that he has, right? Because he and his colleagues on the ground have actually been there on the ground, done it. Dr. Houston as well is a former peacekeeper. Okay, so how do you? Oh, sorry. Dr. Houston did it as well. So how do you do these things? So I want this to be very practical so you understand. Some of you may join the UN sometime. You may be involved in this in the future. So how is this done, right? I always tell you guys, you should have no illusions about working in a place like the UN. You should have idealism, but you should also be pragmatic and realistic. So hopefully that sense of idealism but pragmatism comes through, okay? So I'd like this to be somewhat informal. Yes, let's have a Q&A throughout. There are some themes that we will cover. And as Mr. Groves is speaking, if you think of something, just ask, okay? And maybe he can answer it at that moment. If he can't, I'll try. All right? I'll read my textbook. Okay, so Mr. Groves, thanks again. And let's start. There are about 5 things that I would like to, that we would like to discuss with you. And maybe let's start by getting to know you a little bit better. How you got involved in the Canadian Armed Forces. Let me go to Google. This is what I do all the time. And where are you from? It's there.
I have to.
You don't need to do this. You know that.
Okay, I'm from a town in Canada called Sudbury. It's the world's largest nickel mine. Excuse me, it's about 450 kilometers north of the city of Toronto. And I don't know, because I can't see with a map, but I can tell you it's one of the coldest places that people inhabit in Canada. My son, who is there now, I was talking to him yesterday, and in a 24-hour period it went, and this is, now we're on to what, yesterday was the 17th. So in 24-hour period, it went from 0 degrees Celsius and snowing. Then the temperature went up to 3 degrees and raining. Then it dropped overnight to minus 5 degrees and everything froze solid. And that's in the middle of May. So it's not the place you want to go for a beach holiday. That's why I live in Hawaii. I know where to go and where not to go. It's a very, very cold place. Unless you want to work in the mines there, there's not much to do. I come from a family of 5 boys and 1 girl, and when I was finishing high school, my father, who himself was a career military guy, said, okay, what's your plan after high school? I don't know, work in the mine, I guess. And to which he said, really, that's the best you can kind of come up with. I mean, it's good paying work, it's honest work, but frankly, ambition and the future was not on my agenda in any way, shape or form. So, long story short, he marched me down to the recruiting office for the army and said, let's have a look at what kind of opportunities they have there. They had copied actually from the British a program called the Boy Soldier Program. And actually, this program now, if you're in UNICEF, if you ever get a job in UNICEF, this would violate all the laws that you could imagine. But at the time it was quite popular. So at 15 years old, I went into the army. And at 15.
Okay.
And the program was actually quite good because your days were split up into kind of segments. The deal was you had to get your high school diploma. So some of those hours in the day I was at high school, getting standard mathematics, history, English, high school diploma eventually. You had to take military training, so that was the usual running around, shooting a rifle, shining your boots, that sort of thing. So that was a big part of the day. Then you had to take a trade, excuse me, and you didn't have much choice in what that trade was. So you could become, for example, a driver, or a signals operator, operate communications equipment. And I was told I was going to be trained to be a paramedic. We didn't call it paramedic exactly, but that's what it was. And I thought, well, that sounds pretty cool, because after I've done 2 years in the army, then I can leave and maybe go work as an ambulance driver. So there's a career option there. And but I didn't know that to be a medic in the army also meant you were in the band. And I said, what do you mean the band? But that was a condition, because when you were back home in the garrison, you marched around in parades and played your instrument, and then when you go off to war, you're the stretcher bearers and the first aid people that look after injured soldiers. So, frankly, the medical side interested me. I knew that I couldn't play any kind of instrument whatsoever. I wasn't interested in any kind of instrument whatsoever. So they said, okay, we'll make you a drummer. But part of my training program, and this took 1 year, was that I wasn't allowed to actually use the drumsticks to hit the skin of the drum, because I was so bad at it that I just had to kind of march around and pretend I was doing it. And so at the end of that year, and I was called then a private trained higher rate, at the end of that year they said, okay, now what are you going to do? And I said, I want out of here, I want into the regiment. And they said, well, the regiment will be happy to take you, except you're only 16 years old, and you have to be 17 to serve in the regiment. So they signed a special waiver allowing me to serve in the regiment as long as I didn't basically do anything. And then 1 week later, we got on a plane to go to Congo in 1963. And I was 16 years old. I was more frightened than you can imagine. I had never seen anything really outside of my nice cold mining town. I had no experience in the world. I had no experience with any kind of international affairs. I didn't even know where Congo was, frankly. I had no clue whatsoever. And if you want to discuss the political situation at the time, 1963-64 Congo, even today I probably couldn't really explain it.
So you just got on the plane and
I was marched on a plane with all the other soldiers, and the idea was that being the young guy, because I have to put in context that nearly everybody else serving in my unit were either veterans of the Second World War or Korean War. And so I was the baby. I was even afraid of the other soldiers. I was so young, and they were these big tough guys and heavy drinkers, and at night all they did was play poker and fight. And excuse me, I was really a fish out of water, I have to say. And by that time, working in the mines was actually starting to look like a much better option. But anyway, and without being too dramatic, when my aircraft arrived at the airport in Congo, Leopoldville, now Kinshasa, we got off the airplane, and the sergeant who was kind of ordering us around, and I was supposed to do little odd jobs for him, he got shot as we came off the airplane. And much to our surprise, first thing, I had never heard of bullet fired at Anchorage before. Secondly, I'd never seen anybody hurt before. Third, I'd never seen anybody with so much blood before. So it was all very shocking. So you grow up very, very quickly. And the other thing is, because even Canada at that time was so out of touch with operational activity that all of their weapons were actually stowed in the cargo of the airplane, because the Royal Canadian Air Force did not want army guys inside their airplane with weapons. So we couldn't even defend ourselves. So that was my introduction to the military. As I said, it was frightening, and I didn't know what I was doing.
And so at that time, this is maybe 7 years after the Suez Crisis.
Correct.
And Canada was still very celebrated for the creation of peacekeeping at the UN. Did you or your colleagues, fellow soldiers, have any sense of that Canadian achievement, the sense of pride or purpose that Canadians felt?
No, frankly not at that time. I would say that came later. I didn't at that time. I knew that Lester Pearson had been was our Prime Minister. I knew that we in Canada kind of said yes, we invented peacekeeping, only because I was told that during some kind of introductory lecture. But I hadn't experienced it. I didn't really know what it meant. We didn't know ourselves what it meant. And I have to say, with Dr. Houston being here, the country that was actually one of the most involved was Ireland at that time. And if you ever want to watch a very, very good Netflix movie, you should watch a movie called The Siege of Jarrettville, which was about 150 Irish soldiers who fended off 3,000 rebellious natives led by French and Belgian mercenaries. That's what we knew about. That's what we thought we were going to be part of. I mean, not specifically that unit, that activity, but that was kind of the environment that we were expecting, which in itself didn't turn out to be that either. But no, the whole concept of peacekeeping, what it meant, what it was supposed to achieve, first of all, was not well known to us. And particularly as you're a young private soldier, information doesn't flow down very well. You're told to carry this, put it down over there, carry that, put it down over there. So I would say the first couple of years of my military career, which I didn't anticipate to actually be a career at that time, to be frank, was all kind of like an exciting, adrenaline-driven blur to me.
And so you entered at that time, and our MC Pinda listed a whole bunch of educational achievements which you acquired along the way,
Correct.
various staff colleges, and you were at the University of Toronto as well. What did you study at U of T?
Business.
Business.
Yeah. There wasn't, again, my choice. The one thing about the Canadian military, I'm not sure really how relevant it is to the discussion, but it kind of will make you understand maybe a little bit about who I am and where I got it, is that it's a very disciplined, but very, it's like working for a benevolent dictator sort of thing. Your bosses tell you what to do, they tell you where to be, and as long as you do what you're told, things will come your way. And if you try to manipulate the system, it doesn't necessarily come your way. So the only thing I did, I was the first one. My father told me this: if they want a hard job done, put your hand up. And that's every time somebody says nobody wants to do this, I'll do that. Many times I was sorry I said that, but this was my modus operandi. I didn't know much. I wasn't educated, so I figured if I was at least the volunteer who would do stuff, then I would be looked upon favourably. So as my career moved along, it was actually the Canadian government who said, the business administration degree, for example, my master's in organisational management was only because the three elements of the Canadian Armed Forces were being, we've gone through a history where all the three elements, the Army, Air Force and Navy, have been pushed together into one homogeneous group. More leaders came along later, said, let's split back up into Army, Air Force and Navy, and they formed a team of one Army guy, one Air Force guy, one Navy guy, to work for the head of the personnel department to figure out how to do this. And actually, all three of us said, we don't know anything about that. They said, well, that's simple. We'll line up a degree course for you, and we'll pay for it, and we'll send you there, and we'll move you and your family to the town, and you take it's like another training course. So, I'm I have to say, extremely grateful to Canada for doing that, because otherwise I would be a high school graduate with very limited opportunities. They figured out what I needed to do, and they're the ones that sent me.
So the Canadian Armed Forces afforded you a career, education, and along the way you acquired, sorry. you got married and you had 2 kids. So I wanted to ask you just very quickly about the quote-unquote work-life balance. You must have been away quite a lot from the family. How did you manage that?
It's not easy, there's no question about it. I have to say that, that list that you had up there before, these are, if I say 1977, it wasn't all of 1997. UN missions are usually 6 months. So depending on the rotation, it's like 5 to 7. But when you get off the airplane and come home, somebody says, okay, now you're going on a training exercise for 6 weeks to the Arctic or something like that. And when I went to Beirut as on the list there, I was actually serving in Germany, but there was a lot of trouble in Beirut and soldiers were needed there. We put a team together to do that particular task, went and did it, came out, and then went back to serving in Germany. So, if you kind of look at it in a kind of finite way, it was, you come home on Friday, you do your laundry on Saturday, you play with the kids on Sunday, and Monday you go somewhere else. And it's very, very hard, and it sounds a bit cliche, but the success, the person I hate to see it, is having a very strong, capable, well-educated wife who ran things. She had her own career too, as a school teacher. But when you do come home, you can't say, listen, I want to go watch TV, You have to focus on your family, you have to give it full attention, which I think is true anyway, no matter what kind of job you have. If you're going to have a family, you have to focus, you have to give them your attention. And in return, they give you support. But it's not easy, A friend of mine, his wife, a military friend, his wife wrote a book called Hurry Up and Wait. And in this book, she is very intended to be humanist, but she said in the basement, the lower floors of the army headquarters in Ottawa, there was a special section, and they kept track of when all the women were pregnant, and that's when they sent the husband away. They would keep track of when the children's birthdays were coming up, that's when they would send the husbands away. And she wrote a whole book about these kind of humorous situations, but it actually is a reflection of the truth. Until my kids were older teenagers, I was never at home. I have one birthday in April and one birthday in June. I was never home for any of their birthdays, ever. Probably in 15 years I was home maybe 2 times for Christmas, and for us Christmas is a big celebration. So it's not easy. I don't know what the magic solution is. Some people it works for, some people don't. We have to say, and I think it's not unlike other militaries, but we do have a very high divorce rate. Because for many people it's just not working out.
Yeah, I wanted to get that family, personal perspective in. Again, we're looking at this from the ground up, and to know the reality that they face as they go through this career that we sometimes, idealize and again study through textbooks and films and so on. So
can I just
sure,
one point just came to me. The other thing that's important is that in the military, not only are you going to these other places, but in the middle of that matrix, you're also posted. So in the Canadian Army, officers stay 2 years in one place. If you're enlisted, let's say sergeant, it's 3 years, and then you move. Now, when I moved, from example, from my home base is a place called Petawawa. It's on a large Indian reservation. If I moved from Petawawa to where a big training base is in a place called Gagetown, it's on the east coast of the country, I arrive there, it's the same people I've been working with, I put on the same clothes, I do the same thing, it just happens to be in a different place. For your family, it means the changing of schools, changing of friends, in some places changing of language. You go from an English-speaking place, you're suddenly in a French-speaking place, you're suddenly in a German-speaking place, you're in a Norwegian-speaking place, and for me that's just another day on the job. But for the families, they have to give up anything. My wife, for example, has 2 bachelor's degrees and a master's degree in teaching. Every single time we moved, she lost her job. And in Canada, where education is provincial, if you move to another province, it's different qualifications. And so, that's why I think the family side of it is a major factor. And if you end up working in the UN, depending on where, of course, but if you're in a job that's kind of field-related, you face this similar kind of experience.
Thank you very much for sharing those personal thoughts. Maybe we could move on to a second theme now, which is the actual peacekeeping, peace-building operations. What I'm interested in, and I'm sure everyone here is interested in, is, okay, how does it all happen? So you have a problem in Suez, you have a problem in the Congo. By the way, we'll come back to this later on, but the Suez kind of crisis and the Congo kind of crisis, are they the same? Probably 2 different kinds of crises. And the Congo kind of crisis was in fact an internal rebellion. It was not, as we say, in the classroom, an interstate war necessarily. The crux of it was intrastate, etc. You've heard all of those terms. We'll come back to that. But now, okay, the UN Security Council takes a resolution, create a peacekeeping force. What happens next? Chapter 7, you can read it. It says, the member states will coordinate expeditiously, very quickly, to create this force. In practice, what does that mean?
Okay, I've had some experience in that, and it's quite messy, I have to say. It doesn't work as well as you might think, because even at the Security Council level, all the member states have their own interest. I very rarely have experienced where anybody involved in any of these activities has, shall we say, pure interest. Everybody wants something out of this. Now, whether it's the natural resources that happen to be there or some other political consideration, there's always something. So it's not. And military people, we try to block that out. And so in New York, there's a section called the Peacekeeping Operations Section. And there are officers posted there from pretty well all the member states. And then we talk about troop contributing countries. So what happens is somebody comes along and says, okay, Security Council has decided we want to do this in Congo, for example. Military people really don't have much say on what this is. So often it changes midway, and it more often than not, changes on the ground. But it starts off with somebody else's vision of what should be happening. These sections get instructions from their home government, and basically they'll say, Canada will say, yeah, we'll get involved in that. Ireland will say, yeah, we'll get involved in that. Canada, I can tell you from my perspective, we're very proud of always saying we've been involved in every peacekeeping mission since day one. And some in big ways, some in very small ways, but we've always been involved. So Canada will always say yes. They could be sending one person, but Canada will always say yes. France will say, no way. America will say, no way. Because there's also issues eventually not only of troops, but there's money. And so this kind of messy collaboration goes on in New York, and it kind of whittles down. So you go to 170 countries, kind of whittling it down, and then you end up with maybe 8 or 9 that might say, yes, we'll be involved. Then you have to take into other considerations. Congo, other than local dialects, if we want to use that as an example, is a French-speaking country. Well, where do you get French-speaking troops to send? Well, they're France, they're Belgium, Canada, and a few other smaller countries. Well, in Belgium, Congo, where King Leopold killed thousands of people for financial gain, it's not very popular there. So you don't want to be a Belgian turning up in Congo and telling people what to do. France, also their hands there are not so clean. So we don't want French here. So who's left? Well, Canada. Canada says, yeah, we have a very small army. We're already in Cyprus, we're already over here and somewhere else. Then somebody says, well, we also have the African Union. Don't forget the African Union, which was formed on a very loose principle of let's solve our own problems with our own people. And they say, well, yeah, but we want you to be kind of UN. And the African Union says, yeah, but we're not UN. We don't really want to be UN. We want to be on our own leadership. So these things go back and forth, and eventually end up with a force that's agreed upon, which will go from this date to that date with the intention of accomplishing something.
A quick footnote. Yeah. So that process that you were describing, from the time that the resolution is taken, are we talking hours, days, weeks?
It takes hours just to decide on when the first coffee break will be. It can be months. I'm trying to think of a specific example, one doesn't come to mind, but certainly it goes on for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. But then it's finally decided, Canada's going to send 150 men. So then Canada says, okay, where are those men going to come from? Well, last time they came from the east of Canada, let's send some from the west of Canada. And now the people out in the west of Canada say, well, right now we've got all these forest fires that are burning in Alberta. We need to use all the soldiers to put out the forest fires. So you can't have any soldiers from here. And so even at national level, it goes back and forth. Because very few countries, except really, really large countries, China, India, Pakistan, I would say the French and British do a little bit, and the USA, and the only countries that could instantly say, here's 150 people, go. The rest of us, it takes some time to even, once it's been decided, to actually put the two together. Then you have to prepare them. And in Canada, they come to my base in this place called Petawawa, which is a UN training base, and then they have to be trained. You know, what about that country? What about the language? What about the local cultural issues? You know, what's actually going on when you get there, and so on. So it can be a very lengthy process.
Yeah, well, one of the, I think, important things I'd like us all to retain from this, what you were just saying, is those who commit troops to peacekeeping or peace building, whatever, they don't do it out of the goodness of their heart. They have interests. I was teaching at the RMC, the Royal Military College of Canada, many years ago, and one of the students was asking a guest speaker, whom you know very well, who was talking about, you were in Bosnia as well, talking about Bosnia and asking, what are you guys thinking about up there at the height of the UN? And we are down here trying to save people. And the answer was, well, you will not be there if your country does not have interests, right? And this is speaking directly to a Canadian, infantryman. So there is, it's important to note that gap in understanding. Interests are involved. As you were speaking also, something else occurred, you're talking about the French, Canadians, whoever else, and the Americans. There's the issue of who will lead the force at the operational level. Now I understand that the United States, for example, will not allow its troops to be commanded by anyone else.
That's correct.
And so are there other countries who reason that way?
To my knowledge, the Americans are the only ones. The only ones. This is why they don't participate in the International Criminal Court, but say we should send people there. But they'll send troops, but they won't have them commanded by others. And most other countries, it's not palatable sometimes, I would say. As a serving soldier, you want your leader to be somebody who you have confidence in. We say that we train hard in peacetime, so that when we go to war, you have confidence in your leaders, that you know the decisions they're taking are based on some common sense, sensible rationale. And I have to tell you that in my experience, from time to time, I've had the experience, rarely with my own countrymen, because I know the system and we have a very rigorous system, so you only move up if you're pretty good to start with. We have the odd bad apple, but generally speaking, you move to the top if you're good. But it's not true in all countries, and I've been in places where, for example, with very high-ranking officers that I wouldn't even use to sweep the floor of my tent. The very, very incompetent, poor, self-serving people who have been selected because, everybody wants a fair turn. That's the other thing is, you say, well, you took somebody from country A yesterday, now it's country B's turn. You say, but country B is like an awful place, and they say, it doesn't matter, it's their turn. So we're faced with those kind of things. But most countries, I have to say, it works out. Because when you have a weak leader, the deputy is usually from another country. Or maybe depending on what level you're at, the person below that is from another country. And can be quite competent. And you talk about there's something in it for us. It can be very low level. We'll mention countries, but there are some, every peacekeeping soldier receives a monthly UN pay of, right now it's $1,300 a month. Now in my army, when we come home from 6 months away, that means a young private soldier whose salary might be $800 a month normally, now has in the bank $700,000 or $800,000. And the first thing they all do is take that money, run out and buy a new car. That's kind of the cycle. That's why outside my base, you have all these car dealerships lined up. Car dealerships on that side, bars on this side. And by a week later, they have no money left. But there are some countries that money is taken by the national government, and it's a way of getting US dollars into their bank account, and their soldiers don't get anything for it. So if you send 1,000 soldiers at $1,300 a month, your government bank account is going to get fat very quickly, and that's also a factor as well.
Yeah. So if I could come back to the decision making, the command process. So okay, let's say the 8 countries hypothetically that you mentioned, it's whittled down to these 8 countries who have decided we will contribute troops. So there are 2 things. One is the command structure. So the command structure, the Secretary General is the boss, is it?
Well, in principle, the Secretary General is the boss,
right?
But he's actually the Chief Administrative Officer of the UN.
Right.
Is his real role. What usually happens is that he appoints a representative, the special representative of the SG. So you hear SRSG mentioned all the time, and he'll be, or she will be appointed as the head of the operation. Because the whole operation is not only soldiers, it's police officers, it could be firemen, it could be medical people, it could be politicians, media people, and so on. So the big operation have a wide range of people. So you have this civilian boss. In some rare occasions, when it's kind of all military work, the boss will be usually a lieutenant general level from that country. So it kind of depends, but the model that they prefer, and what we're most used to, is that a civilian is in charge.
Right. So overall the Secretary General,
yeah.
The Secretary General is advised by a military committee.
Well, yeah, I mean...
And there's that committee of 33 or whatever it's called.
Yeah, there is a military committee that gives advice, but I don't want to discount them.
Please.
I don't know if we've got Chatham House rules here or not, but
it stays here.
But the military committee is, for the most part, senior officers who like living in New York.
New York.
And I presented at the beginning of the UN entry into Iraq in 2003. I presented to that committee on the issue of what happens if chemical, biological weapons are used against the UN staff members. Because one of my other qualifications from when I was in the Cold War days of Germany was I was what we call the Brigade Nuclear, Biological and Chemical Warfare Officer. So I had special training in things like that. And so the question was, explain to the military committee what the UN is going to do and or need should our staff, civilian staff, be exposed to chemicals, for example, with weapons of mass destruction, as you may know, with the big perceived threat. So I spoke to and I was a bit, I wouldn't say nervous exactly, but it's okay speaking to educated people and you're having a nice discussion. But as a soldier who goes and sits in front of 30-odd very, very senior old guys from the military, it's a bit nerve-wracking. But that's actually one of the biggest lessons I learned, is that just because you're high-ranking doesn't mean to say you know anything. Because I talked about a number of things, and you could tell there's like 4 people over there sleeping, one over there reading the newspaper, I mean, they weren't even interested. And
sounds like classes.
That's mean. No, I was disappointed, I have to say, because I was expecting, a very strong intellectual discussion, people pointing at me and saying, well, tell me this, tell me that, and it was, yeah, okay, we've done that. Next, So I have very little confidence. I have to be honest, it was my only time that I directly dealt with them. But I have a number of colleagues and friends from different militaries who had to deal with them on a regular basis. And when you talk about the military committee, most people kind of roll their eyes. The two strong lines at work: Secretary General, SRSG, the mission.
SRSG is the special
representative of the Secretary General.
Right.
So he's Secretary General number 1, SRSG number 2, then the mission. The other one is national lines.
Right.
So if you're in a mission, doesn't matter how big or small, the most senior person of that nationality there is the de facto contingent commander. So if I was somewhere, I could be way at the bottom of the hierarchy, but I'm a senior Canadian, then I will have a direct link to Canada.
Right.
And my link goes to my commander, whoever that is. And my commander will then have his. So if I don't, I can give you some examples afterwards, but if I don't like what's going on, I'm being mistreated. You know, I'm not getting my lunch on time, whatever it is, and I want to complain. And I tell my Canadian boss, and he tells his boss. Eventually the Prime Minister will find out, and he'll go to New York, and he'll say, this is not good enough. So you've got these, I'm oversimplifying, but those are the two effective routes. Secretary General, SRSG, the mission. Stuart Groves, Canadian boss, his boss, Prime Minister, sort of like that.
I see. So if I take, you were in Yugoslavia, if I take, just from what I've heard and read in the news and so on, you have the Secretary General Boutros Ghali, who is from Egypt. He's the overall boss. Then you have that hierarchy that you described. But then you have a French general on the ground, General Morillo.
Right.
And General Morillo, I understood, was sort of the commander of the UNPROFOR forces on the ground. So now, whoever contributes troops, they answer to General Morillo.
On operational.
On operation.
Yeah, there are two terms in the military that are probably good to know. One is under command, and the other one is operational control.
I see.
So, Dr. Houston is under my command. I tell him what to do, when to eat, when to sleep. I pay his salary. I make sure his rent is paid at home, and so on. Because he's under my command. I'm totally responsible for him in every respect. You're under my operational control, which means you work for me, I can tell you what I want you to do, and that's the end of it. So I can say, drive that truck down the road, you have to do it. But I can't tell you when to eat, when to sleep, how to dress, so on. Again, oversimplifying, but it's like that. So in these arrangements, they are specifically spelled out in your orders. So you'll say, the Canadian contingent is under operational control of General Morillo.
Right.
Or, the Canadian contingent is under command of General so-and-so, but it's usually spelled out very clearly.
Right.
And it gets complicated. I have a great example I'll come back to afterwards, which will answer all these kind of things. Actually doesn't answer, it presents the scope of the problem,
right.
I would say, but it's not easy.
So we'll come back to that in a little while. One of the things that we learn about in our classes or textbooks and so on, that we teach about is this difference between a peacekeeping operation and what we call today peace-building operations. So the peacekeeping kind of operation, Suez crisis, where's the Suez? I put it up somewhere here, all of this stuff, in 1954, etc. France, Britain fighting Egypt for control of the Suez Canal that you see there. Behind the two camps, and also Israel, along with France and UK. Behind the two camps are the two superpowers, etc. And that's one of the let's say, reasons why the invention of UN peacekeeping is considered so successful. It was a way that the UN system found to try to keep the superpowers from fighting each other directly. At least that's what something that is you read in the textbooks, and to some extent that's true. Many of the conflicts that the peacekeepers were involved in had the superpowers in the background. Yeah? So now, UN peacekeeping involves the two sides agreeing that a force could be put, so you need the consent of the two sides, and you put the force between them, so whether it's Suez, or whether it's Lebanon, or whether it's Cyprus, etc., etc. And now, fast forward to the 90s, we have this transition towards what we call peace building. So now, I wanted to get your sense of, was it ever that clear cut? Because peace building involves, nation building, regenerating electoral processes, all of those things. We were just discussing this in class in relation to what's happening in Haiti today. So, was it ever that clear cut? At the ground level, what you did, what the mandates of the missions, what you had to achieve, and so on, was it that clear cut?
Well, I go back to the point you made earlier. No two missions, certainly, and there's been, 70 more, almost 80 peacekeeping missions since the beginning. No two of them have been the same. The geography is the same, the conditions are the same, the participants in whatever the issue is were different, and so on. So it's kind of hard to say, unequivocally, this is how it is, for sure. As a kind of a general answer, I would say that all the ones I've been involved in, and granted, my early years, as I come back to the point, really had no clue what was going on other than what I was told to do. And it was only when I started to get to, I would say, a little higher, because even though I retired as an officer, say I started, as I mentioned, as a private, I started in 1962, and it wasn't until 1976 that I was actually commissioned from the ranks to become an officer. In Canada, you can start as an officer, or you can work your way up. The issue was that I had about 15 years of practical hands-on experience dealing with soldiers, and taking big orders and breaking them down into little orders, but I had no experience in bigger issues. So when you get promoted to become an officer, then you start to get involved in more of these issues. And so there's a certain amount of training and so on goes on. So up until that point, if you imagine you're building a building, I was the guy that was down with 4 guys down on the basement shoveling the sand. That's kind of what I did. Well, actually, I told other people where to shovel the sand. And but then all of a sudden, you send on a course and you come back and they say, you're in charge of the whole building. You're the architect, the engineer, and so on. And you sort of go, well, I have no clue, So that was kind of my UN experience. And only through self-study did I finally get to the point where you're kind of saying, I kind of get the picture, And the first time it really, I would say, became clear to me, I was sent to Burundi, and I was working the Rwanda, Burundi, Democratic Republic of Congo kind of circle, different things in different places. And when I got there, I was asked to go over to a UN meeting. I was still in uniform. I was asked to go to a UN meeting because they were having some logistic issues. Burundi was under an embargo, so no aircraft in or out, and so on. And there were some issues to solve, and perhaps I could help. So off I went, and I arrived there, and I went to this UN meeting. So the chair of the meeting was the UNDP resident representative. So that's kind of like, I don't know if you know how that system works, but he's kind of like the UN ambassador in that country. And he kind of has this oversight over all UN activity. So I went in, I said I had to go meet him. And he was a fellow Canadian, so I thought, well, that would make things a bit easier. So I went into the room, and it was a room like this, full of people. What are all these people doing here? And so this kind of introduction went, well, High Commissioner for Refugees, Human Rights, UNICEF, ILO, you know, and so it went. IOM, Save the Children, going down, and I look, yeah, but what do they all want, you know? And so it becomes very confusing because the World Health Organization, it's fairly simple, and I think you all know the World Health Organization. You know, they give medical advice, they give vaccines, so on and so forth. They usually, in countries like Burundi, they have anti-malaria programs and so on. So I know that. So, Miss World Health Organization, please tell us what it is you're doing here. And I'm taking notes, you know, you need a truck, you need so on, you need some soldiers to protect you. And they say, well, we're building some tents over here for the camp. You go, well, what are you building camp for? You know, World Health. They say, well, we're building it for refugees. I go, well, what about the HCR person? I thought they built tents for refugees. Go, no, we're doing a medical program over in this other town. Because as a military guy, you know, it's very, in the military it's simple. You drive the truck, you fill up the truck, you deliver the food. End of problem. That's why I was brought there to help. And all these people had their own kind of complex mandates, in addition to the principal one that I thought they had. And as I gained more experience, I came to understand that a lot of this was about donor funding, because everybody's competing for donor funding. So if World Health says we're doing all of this, they'll get more money than HCR that says, well, we're just putting up a few tents. And so it is very, very complicated, and it takes a long time to fully understand. I think by kind of, I don't know, maybe after about 10 years working on the civilian side of the UN, I kind of finally understood it.
Yeah, what you're describing is a lot of duplication.
A lot of duplication, a lot of competitiveness, and in some cases, differing levels of competence.
Right.
You know, and and if you're the military person in that kind of mix, where you're used to receiving orders, giving orders, getting certain things done, and you know, everyone wants to have a committee meeting and get a consensus, and everybody has to report back to their headquarters in New York or Geneva or Vienna or Rome. It's very messy.
I understand. So on this point of duplication, there's obviously a lot of waste involved because of that duplication. Everybody's acting in good faith, but money is maybe not spent most efficiently. And now, just on that point, as a footnote, I understand that there developed a kind of an interagency coordination mechanism to discuss precisely this in Geneva, or generally?
Generally, it's called the IASC, referring to IASC, the Interagency Standing Committee. I have to say, one of my, I was going to say heroes, maybe that's too strong a word, but somebody that I respect a lot as a Secretary General was Kofi Annan, because he was a staff member who rose to the level of Secretary General. He wasn't a pure political appointee. Often, people used to be presidents or prime ministers. He was a staff member. He started as I believe, as an intern in the finance division in Geneva, and worked his way up through all the ranks. Eventually became the Secretary General. He knew a lot. He was a very wise man, very pragmatic, and he was one of the first ones that I ever heard say, "What I just described is not good. We need to bring all these things. All the tent builders need to be in the tent building department. All the vaccine giving people need to be in the vaccine giving department." And he was like that. You go to any town, you talk about Sudan. I was there not too long ago, and in Khartoum, which you see on the television is under bombardment and fighting on it. you go all over town. There was a little UN office here, a little UN office there. And so he had this vision of bringing everybody into one UN house. One provision, all the support facilities would be one support facility. People would work together on a daily basis and so on. And as part of that process, there are a number of centralizing kind of organizations developed. One was the IASC, the Internet Agency Standing Committee, where all the actors would get together, first of all on a regular, I think they're meeting twice a year now, it used to be once a year, and they would discuss all these problems. And you get all the representatives together. And they would develop common policies. And because at that time I was in the UN security world, we took all the various elements of the security world and put those all together, because they were all fragmented. World Health had their own security officers, human rights. New York, you go to Rwanda, they had a security department there, all operating with different policies, different procedures. And that was all brought together, and it continues even to this day to become more compact and compressed and efficient and so on. And the reason I know about IASC so well was because, as I mentioned to you earlier, is that I had, there was an issue of armed protection of humanitarian convoys. So if you've got a convoy full of food trucks that wants to go into the middle of the desert through rebel-held countries, areas, where they could be ambushed or the food stolen and so on, is it correct to put either UN armed soldiers on that convoy where the principle was that the people who want to ambush you and steal the rice off those trucks are doing it because they're starving? So is it okay to shoot them to protect the rice to give to a different group of starving people? So that was kind of the discussion. And they said, well, if you... And the military said, we don't want anything to do with that. And then they said, well, we get private contractors. You know, they should be able to defend themselves. And this went on for a couple of years through this centralizing committee. And finally, the decision was, unless it reaches a certain level of life or death for the people you're delivering to, if they steal the rice, they steal the rice. We'll just get 5 more trucks tomorrow and try again. But that was through the medium of this centralized committee that is primarily a humanitarian committee that brings all the elements together.
So I thank you for that. I think where I started with that question was on this overall difference between PKOs, peacekeeping operations, peace building. Well, in your answer, you noted the ground reality of kind of donor-driven activities, behavior by different agencies, and that's a very interesting perspective that one must note as well. The peace-building side of it, operations, I imagine, from the mid-90s, now, it's very difficult to... let me throw out some of the operations. Namibia, or Cambodia, or Somalia, or other sins. They're generally classified under the peace-building category. You know, Haiti today, because Haiti is in such a mess that they have to possibly... the missions in Haiti in the last 30 years have had to do with regenerating some kind of political process. And that seems to be, you know, that kind of nation-building activity seems to be common among peace-building operations. It's about protecting human rights, it's about transitional justice, it's about holding elections, etc., far more complex. Is there anything you could say, or you would like to say in a couple minutes about that complexity compared to a peacekeeping?
As a matter of fact, I would.
Okay.
Because you mentioned Somalia, and that was my example that I was going to come back to, because it's a particularly painful issue for me personally and Canada generally.
Can I interrupt you 1 second? How many of you have seen the film Black Hawk Down? Okay. So please. Someone who was there.
Yeah, I was, unfortunately. And with